and welcome on board all our colleagues, and thanks much for tonight. We have a very important guest, Dr. Khaled Mustafa. Dr. Khaled Mustafa is a consultant psychiatrist and a senior medical manager in the NHS. He has more than 32 years of experience in the field of treatment of mental disorders and more than 20 years in medical management in the NHS. Dr. Mustafa started in NHS in 2002, and in the last 20 years, he has had and held several senior medical management positions in England, which focused on the management of doctors. He is a consultant, a medical manager, an appraiser, and he's actually trained as a case investigator and a case manager by the NHS resolution. He has designed and implemented series of programs which have delivered models of care that aims to simplify the patient's journey. Dr. Mustafa has supervised and trained numerous of international medical graduates and medical doctors through both formal and alternative pathways like the MTI, direct sponsorship, and CSER programs. Mustafa will talk tonight about a very interesting topic. The title of the talk of tonight is Am I in Trouble? And this is the case when the medical doctor becomes the focus of investigations. Uh, Dr. Mustafa, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Um, Thank you very much, Dr. Habashi. It's a pleasure to have you, and it's a pleasure to have your audience. Um, as Dr. Habashi said, I am very grateful to the current platform who allowed me to start the discussion and to talk about something that we are all subject to, but very few of us understand or even heard of. I understand that this is a live presentation. It's currently recorded live from the north of England on the 14th of um, November 2024. Um, so, if at any point in the future you are listening to this presentation, you might like to listen to the end of it. We are, as Dr. Habashi said, I've been working as a medical manager in NHS for more than 20 years. And through my 20 years of experience, I have found that this whole topic is, at the best of times, totally unknown to doctors. And unfortunately, at the worst of times, you are in the middle of it and you are passing through the process and you don't even know that this is happening to you. This is going to be a difficult uh, topic and a difficult presentation. So, my first plea to all the audience, alive or who's going to send us questions later, do not take it personally. And the second thing, you are here and you are listening to this as an employee. You're not a doctor, you are treated as an employee. So the relevance of your experience as a medical doctor, irrelevant how great it is, or the relevance of your knowledge and skills, is not here what we are talking about. This is part of your contract with the NHS. Ne- uh, so, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about several topics. We're going to talk about what is NHS resolution, what's a concern, what's a good medical practice, what's the process of a case investigation, and what are the outcomes. As I said, this a, a clinical governance and a legal presentation. So please read this disclaimer carefully. Okay. All the slides and opinions presented in this presentation is our own opinion. The views expressed is my own. It belongs solely to me. It does not reflect the views of my employer or the wider NHS. And we have also to understand that my advice is obsolete as soon as we turn the recording off. So if you are in need of advice, you need to seek proper and accurate legal advice. All the discussion we're going to talk about are of legal relevance. It's legal jargon, it's solicitors speaking to solicitors, it's lawyers speaking to lawyers. Okay? And please do not take any action based on the information you solely understood or questions I've answered through this knowledge. As I said, neither myself or Dr. Habashi are legally trained, and frankly, we are not authorized to give you the appropriate legal advice. Dr. Habashi, next slide, please. Okay, so what is NHS resolution? It's one of the biggest organizations, NHS, that most of you have never even heard of. Okay, so NHS resolution is the resolution. In short, it is responsible of indemnity. Those who work in NHS understand that they are subject to something called NHS indemnity. In short, it's exactly like your car insurance. So the NHS insures its work through an organization. Okay? And this organization is called NHS Resolution. And what does that mean? It means that it's one of its functionality. It's if there is any claim against the doctor or a claim against the trust, they step in, they support the claim from the trust perspective, and then if there's a compensation to be paid, it will be paid through NHS resolution. So that's one of its functions. But it's not the only function for NHS resolution. Okay, NHS resolution also support the resolution or reaching an outcome of performance concerns of individual doctors, dentists, and pharmacists. So it's the organization that supports your organization if there are any concerns raised about your practice. Okay? It also has another role within GP, and I'm not so sure if you've got any GP on the call, but they have similar role when it comes to GP. In the GP world, it's a bit different because of the way the GP contracts are. And lastly, it is responsible in ensuring that the NHS is a safe place to practice by investigating and propagating any lessons about harm and sharing any outcomes if any harm has been produced among the wider NHS. So you can see it's a very, very important organization, and very few of any of us would come to discussions with it, unless of course you are in the world of medical management like myself. Can we progress? So the motto of NHS is to advise, resolve, and learn. We have to understand that then the NHS resolution, the NHS in general, the GMC, or any other organization, their job is to make you perform. They are not there to judge you. So they want things to go well. They want things to go better for you and for the patients. And this is the studies or the statistics from 2021. There was nearly 375,000 doctors registered with the GMC, but only in that year 153 doctors were removed or suspended. You can see it is a very, very, very small proportions of doctors who had faced the problems. Okay. Unfortunately, a significant number of these doctors are of an international medical graduate. So the statistics show that the international medical graduates, and by definition, they are the doctors who the primary medical qualification were obtained from outside the UK, okay, has a higher proportion of being subject to NHS resolution procedures. Okay. Let's move on to the real life. One of the things that always comes to my attention is people do not understand what is a concern. What do you mean by concern? Okay. We're not here talking about a surgeon who doesn't understand how to perform a cardiothoracic, very complex operation. Concerns mean there is a pattern of repeated mistakes. Okay? These mistakes expose the services to financial or substantial risk, including clinical risk. Okay? It can impact on the efficiency of or repetition of the services. It can pose a threat or a potential threat to the patient safety, and it's outside the practice guidelines and standards. So this is a concern. A typical example of a concern that can be raised in NHS is when there is concern that the NHS employee, and from now on we will use the word employee, more better than a doctor. The NHS employee is, for instance, consuming excess alcohol, for showing intoxicated under influence of alcohol in the place of work, or there are concerns about this excessive use. It might be something that they are doing it within their own period, within their own time, uh, but if it's starting to affect their performance, it's affecting them to reputational damage, it can cause the organization concerns, then the organization has the right to raise it as a concern. Okay, of course, currently alcohol is raised as a health concern. Okay, but also if people are not willing to work with the organization. Remember, all these things are part of your contract. So you can't say, I'm not going to engage with it. I'm not going to engage with the organization. Okay. When we receive the contract, we are all keen to see how much salary we're going to get or what is our job plan. But deep inside our contract, you'll find that you are actually signing to be part of this process. So this process is a contractual obligation. And when the organization raises the concern, it's your contractual obligation to respond to it. Next slide. We're going to discuss a hypothetical theoretical case of Dr. A. Okay. So Dr. A, there has been concerns raised about her performance. Dr. A is a newly appointed doctor in the NHS. There has been several concern and date excess that came under her name. Okay. The pattern here is Dr. A, for instance, is not adhering to infection control rules. So she does not acknowledge the infection control. She refused to wear an apron while she's doing procedures, claiming that there's no need for that. She also is very critical of her colleagues, and she is very critical of the NHS guidelines, stating that the guidelines are irrelevant to her. She has been a very experienced, sincere clinician in her country of origin, and that the current guidelines are biased and therefore she does not follow them. There has been several complaints about her attitude with patients, with doctors, trainees. Specific incidents include a trainee doctor who rang her while she was a second on call, stating that he is struggling to stop a bleed. Sorry, doctor. She is struggling to stop a bleed and she needs her help and support. She ended shouting at her over the phone and was overheard by the nursing staff saying, well, she needs to be competent enough and get it together and do the right thing for the patient. The patient was aware and awake, and even the patient was stressed by it. The outcome was the trainee could not help to stop the bleeding. They ended up bringing the on-call consultant, who came in and found that this was a major bleed and it was stopped just on time. It was logged as a serious incident. Another incident where Dr. A has stated that she's been arriving late and leaving early because she doesn't have childcare, and therefore she's not able to join the ward handover and the ward reviews on time, and she's not able to properly hand over her work to the on-call team also on time. Okay. Dr. A also has been um, stated by the trainee that she tried to coerce feedback. So she has sent them the electronic multi-source feedback, and she has asked them to forward to her the link, so in order to help to fill it through, and also ask a trainee and a medical student, when she handed over him the paper form of her multi-source feedback, to fill it in and keep the envelope open and hand it back over to her just to check what they have written. The trainees found that this was inappropriate behavior and reported her. So you can see there are multiple concerns coming from different sources about this doctor's behavior. Next slide. So the first is trying to judge what this doctor is doing. Why do should need investigated? Any doctor in NHS is subject to two main pieces of legislation. Two main pieces. One is fitness to practice. Can you do your job? And this is highlighted by the GMC. It's very well described in the Good Medical Practice Guidance, which was recently reviewed. And it doesn't only shows you clinical practice, but it talks about all aspects of you being a doctor. Now, that's the legislation part. The second thing is the contractual part. When you sign your contract with the organization expects you to be fit for the purpose. They are hiring you to be able to do your job. Okay? And the standards here are maintained by a document called Maintaining High Professional Standards in the Modern NHS. It describes the sets of principles and standards that a doctor is fit to work in the NHS. Next slide, doctor. So, you don't have to have a standard that hits the GMC in order for your organization to investigate you. Okay. When these concerns come to the organization, they have the right within their own policies and procedures, because you have signed in your contract that you will follow these policies and procedures, to be investigated. So the first question that always comes to me, I didn't know about this, I didn't know about this process, this is very biased. Question here is, no, you signed the contract with the NHS, and that includes that you will follow all the NHS organizational process and procedures. Second question comes in is, I've been investigated under other authorities. Okay? And we're going to discuss it in the third step of this. So how does the organization respond to these concerns? Most organizations now have something called Maintaining High Professional Standards Committee, usually chaired by the medical director, attended by the responsible officer, who usually can be either the same person, or some of the large organizations, they are two different people. HR is attending, director of safety, if you have one, director of patient incidences and safety have another. Senior medical managers can also be part of the committee. This committee is presentable of your NHS organization. They meet usually once monthly. Sometimes they meet more frequent, sometimes they meet less, but usually the meeting is once monthly, and they will revise all the incidences related to doctors. Okay, so when you write the datex about the doctor, when there is a complaint about the doctor, when there's a concern about the doctor, when there's been a report about an informal supervision between a staff member and their manager about the doctor, it all comes to this committee. And this committee is very well supported by the medical director's office in his capacity as an executive member of the trust. So they see all this information, okay, and they start gathering. Okay. And what this committee do is they starting to do a preliminary analysis of the concerns. They start understanding what's going on. Name Joe Bloggs keeps appearing in front of this committee. Okay. Now remember, some of the jobs will be, for instance, a high cardiothoracic surgeon that deals with severe pediatric cardiothoracic abnormalities where the mortality rate is very high. So he's working in with cases with mortality rate is expected to be 80%, for instance, unfortunately. So congenital severe anomalies of fetal heart malformation, and therefore he names appears repeatedly in mortality reviews, in mortality concerns. This is not something that will come to this committee. Okay? So the first thing that people need to understand that this is not a committee that is doing a witch hunt. You are complained of because, for instance, you run an ADHD or a neurodiverse service where a lot of patients have this request to be assessed, and your assessment says, well, you're not. So you receive a lot of complaints because you are on the front line of a doctor. Okay. You are working in a triage ward, in an acute busy ward, and the patients are waiting for hours because the whole service is under a lot of stress. Your name comes because you are the named consultant. Again, that's not going to be something that attracts this committee. What this committee is doing is a very preliminary analysis of what are the problems. Okay. Now, that's the first thing that this committee will do. Okay. Second thing is they have now found a problem. There is a lot of concerns about the doctor behavior, attitude, capability, and knowledge. Are very these concerns are quite enough for us to start the investigation. Now, the problem that usually people will have is that doctor, he or she, is in their position. So what do we do? Okay, so there will be several steps. Either the investigation is going on and we allow the doctor to continue. Remember, here we are working as your employer. So I have the right to instruct you to change the pattern and way you work under the employment law and under my authority as an employer. Okay? So what do? We can put series of restrictions. Okay? The first one is we can do an exclusion of practice. So for instance, you are an A&E consultant, you will for once work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. You will not be doing any extra shifts or extra call. So we will exclude some of your practice. Or we can restrict you of your practice. So again, you are an A&E consultant, you will not be allowed, for instance, to see acute triage unwell patients. And now it's more risky. Now, the last one, which the organization have the authority to do, is suspend you. So they will stop you from working, okay? Suspend you from practice. Okay? And that means that you will not be allowed to practice medicine. Now, I have to say that suspension is not something that people take lightly, but it does happen. Okay? And usually once we reach the stage where we have suspension, the number of concerns that we have are quite significant, to usually the extent that we will start, the responsible officer will start concerned if he should be informing the GMC of this process or not. Okay. At this stage, we also will consider whether an investigation needs to start or to stop. There are some reasons where the investigation can stop. One of the very common reasons is that the investigation, for instance, is been taken by a different authority like the police. So the organization will not start this process because remember, this is a process that you are following through your employer as an employer. But if you are think that you have committed a potential crime, the investigation will stop. Or in other situations where the investigations have been escalated to the GMC and the GMC has decided to take its steps. In this case, the organization will stop. But stopping doesn't mean that we will not cooperate fully with the authorities. So stopping the investigations doesn't mean that we will not, for instance, cooperate with the police if they want evidence, or with the GMC. Okay. Remember, all these organizations work together to help doctors and protect patients. Okay. We decided that the investigation needs to go. So the first step is we're gonna take the concerns and review them in the maintaining high professional standards and give an opinion. These concerns, like we heard about Dr. A, they're coming from different sources about different attitudes. There is a problem there. So we have decided that we're going to start the investigation. Okay. This is where my role comes in. The maintaining high professional standards, usually through the medical director and the responsible officer, will instruct a trained senior clinician like myself to become the case manager. I will be responsible on managing these concerns. And I will be presenting the organization in any similar, if there's a hearing or similar procedures, if we go later. So the first thing, once I have appointed once the organization appoints a case manager, the next step is to appoint someone that will do the work, or the case investigator. So I will go to another clinician, senior clinician. Again, myself is trained in that role to become a case investigator. What does that mean? Dr. Mustafa has now been asked to investigate the Dr. A, the behavior, the problem, the concerns. Together with the case manager and case investigator, we will agree something called terms of reference. This is a formal process. It has to be clear. And remember, this is a management process. This is not a medical process. So the case investigator with the case manager will agree what they call terms of reference. What are we going to investigate? What are the situations that we would like to investigate? And what are we investigating for? So for instance, Dr. A, she doesn't wear apron because she refuses to. This is to be investigated under the infection control policies. So the policy, she has violated deliberately the policies of the trust. She has shouting to a trainee and told him to get a grip with it. This will be investigated about dignity at work. So what the terms of reference do, they appoint to certain problems, certain procedures in the organization, certain principles that we will agree to investigate, and the incidents that happen to them. This is where the doctor will be informed of the whole process. If we reach at that stage where we have the terms of reference, because I need to tell the doctor what we are investigating you for. And this is where the doctor will be informed. So, next slide, please. What is expected from the doctor? We expect the doctor to cooperate fully with the process. The process is aiming to identify if there's problems, there's pitfalls, there are concerns. One of the things that get raised in this procedure is doctors sometimes refer to their behavior, to their concerns, as they are being whistleblowing and they are being victimized by the organization. The term whistleblowing is taken very seriously in the NHS, okay? But it cannot be taken as a justification for behavior. Okay? Competencies of colleagues also comes into equation. The competencies of the doctors are of concern, and it's a witch hunt. So again, this has been taken very seriously, and the investigation can highlight that. If it turns out to be that there is a situation of whistleblowing, that the doctor is identify as a whistleblower, then there is very specific and very clear NHS and organizational policies that protects them and protects their identity, protects their status. Organization that would use this process to victimize a whistleblower is highly likely to face a huge backlash, both publicly and privately. And unfortunately, it can even end with some of the people who are involved will be subject to a huge fine, prison sentences, and even losing their own licenses. So it's very highly unlikely that the case manager or case investigator will collude together to victimize the whistleblower. But if it happens, as I said, the law is very highly protective of them. And this is why I put this slide here. Investigation will progress, and I didn't want deliberately to explain the thorough ways of investigation, but the investigation in general will not leave any stone unturned. So, for instance, you're talking about doctors attending, whether they attend or not, and the doctor claims that they attend. The case investigator has the right to say, right, so the first thing you do when you attend is to log on your computer. I can, for instance, ask for the login details for your from your IT department into when did you log in and when did you log out. Okay. And if that is considered as reasonable evidence, I will include it in my evidence. That, for instance, Dr. A, she has to work using the computer systems of the trust. So as long as she's working, she has to be logged in. But it here shows that you have been logged in at 10:15 and you logged out at 12:30. And that's a repeated behavior. Remember, all these evidence will be given to the doctor as part of the investigation, and they were allowed to comment on it. What about data protection? Well, data protection within the organization does not apply to the organization. So the doctor, for instance, cannot argue that the case investigator, i.e. myself, has obtained the IT logins because they are not protected by data protection within the organization. If there's something about, for instance, clinical incidents, the clinical incidents that we talked about when the patient bled and there was concerns, okay, we usually would ask for the patient consent before reaching out for them, but the doctor cannot argue that this is private or non-privileged data that we don't have the right to look into that. Anything that you do within the NHS, within this organization, is monitored and recorded. So currently, if you are logged into the hospital, if you are somewhere in a hospital and you're logged in a hospital and using the Wi-Fi of the hospital, okay, people can tell you have logged into a talk that we have traced back to an IP address that belongs to saving lives. What were you doing? You can always justify, for instance, that this would be a very interesting topic. You can get CPT point for it. But for instance, we had concerns about people accessing the hospital systems for gambling or for unauthorized or unmedical sites, even films. Okay. Again, this is not a witch hunt. There's a difference between you being on call and you are on standby, but you're not required to be all the time on alert, attentive situation, and you're watching something. Okay, but at the same time, if you are an A&E consultant and you have a 5 hours waiting list and you left the A&E department and went out to watch a film for 2 hours, that would be an area of concern. And does the NHS have the right to find out that you're doing this? Yes, you are. Each one of you, when he logs tomorrow morning on the computer of his organization, you will sign there is something that we always skip over and say press OK when the first login. It's a disclaimer. Have you ever read it? Try to read it. Usually it's between 4 and 5 pages, and it says the authorization has every right to follow this. Of course, the organization doesn't have the right to check things like, for instance, if you're logging in to check that your salary has arrived on your bank account. That's not acceptable. That's the breach of data. But for instance, if you are trading in bitcoins and spending times on trading websites while you are at work, now that would be an area of concern. Next slide. This is something that usually happens. We have now been through the investigation. As a case investigator, I have found data and I've submitted it to the case manager. The case manager now will go to the Maintaining High Professional Standards Committee and would consider one of the following. Okay? One, that there are grounds of concerns, but these cases are not enough grounds to initiate any other policies other than progress informally. What does that mean? It means that we will start working with the doctor to improve the areas of concerns. Communication comes very commonly, time at work, health is one of the things that usually comes on very quickly, but we will manage these things by the trust policies. This is a clinical governance process. Okay. Now, the next one, there has been a misconduct. We have found that by our own standards, okay, there's a misconduct. This is something that comes a lot, that doctors would say, look, there has been a case, it has been dealt with, it's gone to the police, it's gone to court, and the court has cleared me. But yet the organization continued. The organization continued because there was grounds of misconduct. When you take a case to the police, when you take the case to the court, the CPS will set up a case and will take it to court, and the court will sentence you using a legal framework called beyond reasonable doubt. That means that I have to have evidence to be sure that you have committed the offense or the charge. Okay. The trust policies and procedures do not hold that high standard of framing. They look at the standard of, is there a suspicion? Is it highly likely that you have committed these things? Okay. And they would take an action according to that. And the current policies and procedures are designed to look at that standard. So there's a misconduct. The local procedure of misconduct will be managed. So for instance, policies of dignity at work, bullying and harassment. There's a policy of dignity at work of your organization. Another outcome is health concerns. People are doing this because they are suffering from a health, physical or mental health concerns. And the organization decide that this will be dealt with through the OK Health route. Then there's capability concerns. You are claiming that this is something that beyond capability. The very common pattern that I'm seeing with a lot of international graduate, international medical graduate doctors is doctors who have arrived and started training straight away, and they claim that they have competencies that they have gained through their countries of origin. The most famous one is what they call the CREST form, which is an a form equivalent to the competencies obtained by foundation years 1 and 2. Occasionally, people do not understand what are these competencies. They are signed them off. They are done under different stances in the country of origin, and they are facing the problem. You have capability concern. Okay. Similarly, when people are claiming that they have capabilities that are not related to their work. So, for instance, you are a GIT doctor who has a vast years of experience in your country, but you spend most of your time, the vast majority of your time, working in an outpatient settings. At the same time, here you are asked to deal with acute abdomen endoscopy, emergency endoscopy, similar things, and you have not done these things at the level that you have described yourself. So this becomes a capability. One of the things is no further action. Okay. It is not unusual that we reach the conclusion that there is no further action required. We've investigated, we've seen the pattern. There isn't something that we need to require further action. Okay. The thing is the restrictions in practice. We can restrict your practice. Okay. And that means that we will ask you as your employer to restrict your practice for a period of time, or sometimes indefinitely. Okay. Dr. Al-Habashi needs to stop performing obs and gynae minor procedures. He's an A&E, he's an ICU consultant, but sometimes he participates in these. So we were saying no, that's not something that we will allow you to do. Okay. Oftenly, it becomes tangled with a private practice as well, because where does the private practice sit? And this becomes a problem. The last thing that it comes in, this investigation aims to improve patient's care. So sometimes we identify through the investigation there are certain policies, procedures in our own organizations that needs to be changed. So one of the recommendations of this process is to ask for an organizational change. Okay. The last, okay. So let's try to summarize. Maintaining high professional standards and the investigations related to them are a governance and a legally binding procedures. You signed to it when you came in. Okay. If you find yourself into this process, do your homework. The idea that I will not attend meeting with Dr. Mustafa, I will not see him, I will not talk to him, it's not going to work. You need to understand that once the investigation is raised, we have to reach an outcome. The third thing, seek professional help. This is a legal and a procedural process that very few of us understand or comprehend. In every organization, there is about 400 policies. Most of us would read some of them that are relevant to the clinical work. But actually, in every organization, there is a huge departmental work that review these policies and update them regularly, especially the ones that are related to investigations. So do they exist? Yes, they do. How can I find them? Go into your organizational depository of policies, you will find them there. Okay. Well, they are there, but I'm not really liable to them. Yes, you are. Okay. So if you're going to engage with the organization, once you start, seek professional help. Please do. Okay. And I'm opening the floor for questions and answers. Thank you very much, Dr. Habashi. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mustafa. And I would like, because I have the control on the slides, I'll go back. There's a slide. So I would like you to reflect on that summary here. So the doctor gets the call after all this process is finished.
Yes.
So I myself, when I see this kind of a slide, I get panic attack. So I don't know if there is any, or no one else in this meeting knows if there is any process of investigations that we are under in the moment. What I don't want to happen is that everyone gets a nightmare tonight, because if you feel I'm under investigations, I'm not aware, how I would like to go tomorrow or next week to my work and practice normally. That's not the aim of these lectures. The aim of these talks is thrive in the NHS, so everyone is practicing happily here. And the whole idea is that there are a lot of institutions that you are accountable to: your employer, the GMC, the court, if in case of like major misconduct affected patient lives. There are organizations that defend and help you, like the BMAs, the MPS and MDU, and those are your helpers. So I would say, whenever you have any concern or thing that you're questioning or concerns about or suspicious of, talk to your clinical lead, talk to your responsible officer, talk to MPS or MD, your indemnity, and if it is something related to your contract, talk to the VMA. They're always there to help you. You are paying them for that. And even if you are not a BMA member, you still candidate to talk to them. And I would like you, Dr. Mustafa, to comment on that, because I feel this is the most fear of this presentation, is this slide to be taken away and say, oh, am I under investigations right now? Oh,
Right.
what should I do?
So
The
there
floor.
are two things for that, Dr. Habsh. Okay. The first is, if you go to the first ever cell in the slides, no, even further, preliminary analysis of concerns. No. So it's the same picture that you're looking at.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So the first one, preliminary analysis of concerns. Okay. It is virtually impossible to start the process without the doctor receiving all this information in bits by pieces. In my experience, I've trained in this process since 2007. Okay. What I found is that the doctor has ignored the warning signs one after the other after the other. So you're getting datics about your infection control and you still ignore it. You get datics again about infection control and you still ignore it. You remember, each time you get a datix, you have to be informed about it. You have to be told about it. You have discussion with your manager about infection control and you still, I'm not convinced with it. Okay. So the problem when we reach the stage with this process happens, okay, what we have found is that these individual statements were very clear to the doctor, and the doctor decided to forget about it. Okay. So this, I rarely find a doctor that this has arrived to him from the blue. Okay. You'll find that discussions has happened with your manager, with your investigator, with your clinical lead, with the educational director. Okay. And people still didn't process. There is most of the time I have found when doctors reach the stages where they had severe consequences, the process didn't apply to them. Oh, look, I'm a consultant. I've been 34 years as a consultant. These things don't happen to me. It's a term that we always hear. Look, I was the one that in COVID saved the organization, staying in the ICU 3 months, sleeping on the floor. How could they do this to me? But you're not
I
addressing
believe,
the question.
Dr. Mustafa, that you heard kind of words like that in your 20 years of experience or 15, 16 years of experience as a case investigator. And I would like to highlight the very importance of reflection on our practice. So whenever you have a datix or whenever you have a comment on your practice or a complaint from a colleague, that's why you need to sit and reflect on that. Because this, despite it is not really wanted in the GMC to see your reflections, but if you have reflections, this is how you improve yourself. So that you may show your reflections at one stage as you are taking such complaints on board and reacting to them, and you are in the process of improving yourself. So whenever you have heard of anything that may touch your reputation as a medical doctor, take it serious and reflect on it. Is that what we would recommend here, Dr. Mustafa?
Yes. And the other thing that what people need to understand, Dr. Habashi, believe it or not, this slide that you see was actually put because prior to 2013, the level of investigation was to the GMC. So I have concerns. The organization doesn't look at it, doesn't try to solve it, doesn't try to look into what local solutions are. The only way was to the GMC. Okay, it was the GMC and the NHS that decided that we need to try to solve it locally through process and procedures. Okay,
Yeah.
and what also happens in that in on occasions, for instance, the case investigator can seek the advice of a professional. Let's say you are, for instance, you're accused of you're not following infection control. I'm not an E&E consultant. I don't understand that. But I have found that Dr. Al-Habashi, for instance, has not followed infection control in 4 or 5 places because there was a clear threat to the patient's life. You had to interfere and stop a bleeding. And in that case, the infection control had to take a step aside. And so one of the things that people do, believe it or not, this is a trial to help you. This is not a process. This is not witch hunting. In each time, we're trying to find out what has happened. Okay. And it is not unusual for the expert witness that we have called to, which usually is from a different trust, someone who is professional, say, look, yes, Dr. Al-Habashi didn't put infection control in because his job as an AE consultant, he was called in immediately. He found a gush of blood and he had to stop it or the patient will die in 10 seconds. So it becomes visible. And in that case, this is where the last part, organization policies. Should you be reporting DATIX as a severe incident because Dr. Habib didn't put intense control? Or should you reflect on the way that this incident has been reported and this is a patient safety measure that Dr. Habib has followed through? So it's a process of learning and development. The worst thing that can happen is that you disengage from it. Oh, I'm not going to do it. Okay. Or, as I said, I'm above it. But also, we have to understand and reflect on our practice. Okay? We have also understand that sometimes the culture is within the NHS. I investigated some time ago a case which is unfortunately that happens. This is one of the processes that sometimes happen of sexual harassment. Okay? And this was a registrar or that level, okay, asking their medical students or contacting medical students through social media individually. Okay. There is no reason for you to contact a medical student, third year medical student at 2 a.m. and ask her, how are you doing? Okay. Of
Be
course,
sensible.
yeah, of course there is. So on sometimes if she was standing in A&E, she nearly got assaulted, she went on shaking, it was a problem. Okay. And you can justify this, but she will not report it as sexual harassment. But if you are repeatedly and we're getting repetition at this, and again, this was one of the cases I investigated long time ago. I had a consultant who we received several reports of him that at the end of his shift he would wait for non-medical staff, secretaries, or students coming out, okay, and ask, "Oh, where are you going?" Well, I'm going home. Oh, can you just drop me on your? Do you drive? Yeah, he target usually someone who is holding a car key. Can you drop me in your situation? And say, for instance, we are on the way to Dorset, for instance. Oh, sorry, I live in Southampton. Can you just take me around? So we had several reports of him deliberately waiting after his shift, targeting vulnerable, what we perceived as vulnerable people, asking them for financial favors. This is the type of concerns that we get. We never get someone, did you discuss, we are going to investigate you because you are a cancer consultant and you have missed, you know, breast cancer in 10,000 films. So you've seen 10,000 screening x-rays and you missed one. We understand that these things happen. Okay? But for instance, there was a very common case in nearby hospital, okay, where the investigation came that the doctor has been claiming significant amount of extra work. And what they found is that he was doing the extra work in his work time. So he was forgetting about his NHS work and doing extra activities during NHS time and claiming the money. By the way, this investigation got stopped and NHS fraud was called because it was considered too much for a process. This is outside of the trust policy investigations. So people who are trying to help patients, benefit people, genuinely are engaged in the process, has nothing to fear. This is not a process to fear. Things that has happened, you might be in the wrong place in the wrong time. As I said, you are a triage consultant and your name appears in every single mortality in the A&E department because you are the triage consultant. Okay, so this investigation will immediately find that, hold on, these are cases, and in that case, the reporting procedure needs to change. It is very
Excellent.
highly unlikely that this will come as a total surprise to the doctor. I've never seen it happening.
What's assuring enough for me, Dr. Mustafa, is out of these 374,500-ish doctors, suspension or strike off had happened in 153 cases. So that's a bit assuring for me, and I believe it would be assuring for our colleagues here as well. But
Always put
please
yourself
reflect.
in a process of a patient or a child. So, for instance, I don't want my child to go into medical school after achieving 4 A pluses to be harassed by a doctor who is twice her age. That's not acceptable. Okay?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't do it. Why would people accept? Why would people, for instance, consider because I am a good doctor that I can spend most of my vast majority of my time gambling while not checking the ward rounds? This is the type of things that people, raise concerns about. But the process of suspension elimination is very rarely happening. But I'm happy more for any further questions or.
Please, we're still in the recording session, so questions in English. If you'd like to ask by voice, I'm allowing you all now to unmute yourselves. So please feel free to unmute yourself or open your video if you wish and ask in voice. I'll allow a minute, or raise hands, please, if you like, if you have any issues with opening your mic. You can also put your questions in the chat box